Hello, friends. Welcome back to another discussion segment on Islamic radicalism. This is your host, Adnan Qaiser. This is part 10 of our discussion in which we are trying to learn about religious terrorism and violence in the faith of Islam. So this, as I said, part 10, I plan to give you the strategy and philosophy that governs the mindset of Al-Qaeda and Daesh, or the Islamic State, as you know it. But allow me to first give you out, ladies and gentlemen, some of the names of some of the terror organizations which are called as the offshoots or the factions or franchises of these major mother parties, terrorist organizations. As I mentioned to you, the present day Islamic militancy has three protagonists. One remains the Al-Qaeda and its offshoots. Number two is Daesh, or the Islamic State, what you call as ISIS or ISIL, Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, as well as in Islamic State in Levant, in the Middle East. And the number three are the sectarian bands, ladies and gentlemen. I've been talking to you about the Shia-Sunni feud in the previous segments. So the anti-Shia, basically the anti-Shia groups include Jundullah, Lashkar-e Jhangvi al-Alami, and several others, smaller. And if you recall that in the root causes segment, I talked to you about the Iraqi government anti-Shia outlook and their policies. So you can imagine that those policies in Iraq also contributed a lot towards the creation of Daesh, which is basically a Sunni terrorist organization. So Daesh also remains an anti-Shia terrorist organization in its outlook and mindset. And this is because of the atrocities and the revenge which the Shias have been exacting from the Sunni population, because they had been kept under repression by President Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Although so that's why there is an outburst of emotions and revenge against the Sunni population. So this is, as I said, that one of the reasons behind the creation of Daesh, which emerged in 2014 during after the end of the Iraq War in 2011. So President Obama, having proclaimed, I had quoted you earlier that despite President Obama had proclaimed that Al-Qaeda has been defeated and decimated, unfortunately it has not as yet. So the terrorist organizations, with its several loose-knit groups, they thrive and they remain a potent threat, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately. And important thing to note is that the strategy and outlook of Al-Qaeda and Daesh differed drastically. Although it's with some convergences in their ideology, but their tactics or modus operandi are different. While Al-Qaeda strived for winning and controlling the hearts and minds of the population through its ideological propagation, Daesh kept focusing on the physical control of a territory for the public display of its global caliphate, in line with the master plan, jihadist master plan, or the 7-stage strategy, may it be in Iraq and Syria or in Afghanistan. I told you earlier about the Islamic State, Khorasan in Afghanistan. So as well as in Somalia and Nigeria as well. If you remember, when I talked to you, I gave you a talk on Boko Haram in Nigeria. They also follow the same Daesh strategy of having physical control over the areas. So unlike Daesh, Al-Qaeda has never subscribed to holding land except influencing the local population in smaller groups. I will discuss the 7-stage strategy in the next segment. That's why, ladies and gentlemen, Al-Qaeda has a global presence. One, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is called as AQAP. It is in Yemen. Number 2, Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, or AQIM in Algeria, Mali, and Mauritania. Number 3, Al-Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent, or the AQIS in Pakistan. Number 4, Jabhat al-Nusra le Ahl al-Sham, or Nusra Front, Al-Nusra Front, as is popularly known as, or Jabhat al-Nusra. It is in Syria. Number 5, Harkatul al-Shabaab al-Mujahideen, or Al-Shabaab in Somalia. Number 6, Boko Haram in Nigeria. I gave you a detailed talk on Boko Haram in Nigeria at YouTube. And number 7, at least 23 smaller groups in Afghanistan and Pakistan, as has been identified by the United Nations, such as Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, or the TTP, Jamaatul Ahrar, or Lashkar-e-Khorasan, as well as the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, or what is called as the IMU, or the East Turkestan Islamic movement, which is known as ETIM, which has lately changed its name to Turkestan Islamic Movement. So from the preceding chapters, I am sure that you have come to know about the goal of Islamist radicals and their modus operandi of using violence and terror as a means to achieve their objectives. Therefore, it is fundamental now, ladies and gentlemen, to understand their philosophy that governs that specific mindset. We must know as to why these jihadis carry a firm belief of their righteousness or being on the true divine path. Without proper diagnosis of what ails the Muslim world, any prescription has not worked in the past, and I am pretty much sure that no remedy is going to work in the future. So a firm understanding of what governs their ideology is imperative. So Al-Qaeda's strategy or philosophy, ladies and gentlemen, had been outlined in a publication known as Idaratul Wahash by Abu Bakr Naji. In English language, Idaratul Wahash means governance in wilderness, or the management of savagery. Idaratul Wahash is said to be a document prepared in early 1990s, probably written in 1991 or in 1993, according to some sources, but its internet version came out in year 2004. Its English translation, ladies and gentlemen, had been carried out by William McCants in a Harvard University's John M. Olin Institute for Strategic Studies on May 23rd, 2006. The translation was titled "The Management of Savagery, the Most Critical Stage Through Which the Ummah Will Pass," by Abu Bakr Naji. I checked the other day, this document has been removed from the web for some unknown reasons. So anyway, Idaratul Wahash, ladies and gentlemen, had been an extension of 1994's Qawaidul Takfir, or rules for expulsion from Islam and apostatization, which was written by Abu Basir al-Tartusi. Al-Tartusi formulated these qawaid or rules after the defeat of former Soviet Union in the Afghan Jihad in the 1980s. In Afghanistan, the Muslim fighters who had gathered at that time as a well thought out policy by the West, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan, were brimming with exuberance and confidence for having defeated a superpower in Afghanistan, which they called as atheist and godless. The jihadists at that time believed that it was made only possible through their resolute faith, their Islamic courage, and their God's support to their divine mission. The qawaid or the rules aimed at transforming the Muslim societies by turning the Ibn al-Balad or the sons of soil into blood brothers and devoted jihadist Muslims. You can call it recruitment or whatever. So Balad, ladies and gentlemen, in Arabic language literally means city. So these militants then invoke two injunctions. Number one is called Khuruj, which is revolt against deviant Muslim rulers and expel them from the fold of Islam. Moreover, and because they believe that the rulers have gone astray from the divine path of Islam. Moreover, with the Muslim rulers siding and supporting the Western infidel powers or the kuffar warrant their expulsion from the fold of Islam. Number two is takfir. Takfir, ladies and gentlemen, I have already mentioned in the past in the root causes. It means killing or apostatization of those Muslims and non-Muslims who are believed to be heretic or deviant from the true path of the puritanical Islam. Abu Bakr Naji, whose real name was believed to be Muhammad Khalil al-Hakema, advocated his execution of savagery in three stages. In stage one, which he called the vexation and empowerment stage, he proposed to break the will of the enemy by carrying out target attacks at enemies' vital economic and strategic installations. In Muslim majority countries, these would include the oil facilities as well as tourism infrastructure places. Thus, we saw the Bali bombings, very famous, which took place at a tourist resort in Indonesia on October 12, 2002, killing 202 innocent people, including 88 Australians, 38 Indonesians, and 23 British nationals, as well as 20 people from other smaller nationalities. Naji believed through his campaign of constant violent attacks, or what he called his vexation operations in the Muslim states, the jihadists would eventually exhaust out the enemy and break the central nervous system of the governments. The attacks would further shatter the will and determination of the security forces to enforce their authority. The insurgency style guerrilla warfare would not only thin out the ability of the law enforcing agencies or authorities to protect their installations, but also lose their concentration to focus on preventing future target attacks at unknown sensitive sites. The security forces' weakened ability and withering power would further lead to a total chaos and a complete breakdown of public order and safety. Naji knew well, as a military strategist, that when armies and security forces concentrate at one area, they lose control over vast swathes of land and population centers. And if the defense forces spread out, they lose their armor and their effectiveness. In addition to such a vexing strategy, Naji directed his jihadists to infiltrate and penetrate into the armed forces, intelligence agencies and their networks, police and law enforcing organizations, political parties, newspapers, electronic media groups, petroleum companies, private security companies, and civil defense institutions to have prior knowledge and inside information about their proposed plans and their counter strategy operations. Like the ancient Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu, who had written the very world famous The Art of War, or the Indian war philosopher named Chanakya. Naji had counseled his Salafist jihadist to make full use of that security vacuum caused by the dispersal of security forces and destroy each and every target using brute force. That use of extreme violence, Naji believed, would work as a media strategy in order to influence public opinion. The success of jihadist attention-grabbing terror operations would not only lead to the loss of faith among the local population in their security forces, but will also convince the people about the rationality and justification for the implementation of Sharia law. Finally, Naji believed that such a strategy would inspire and attract the youth to join the jihadist forces and become Ibn al-Balad, or the real blood brothers and jihadist sons of soil. In stage 2, Naji proposed the administration of savagery, or the Idaratul Tahush. He was convinced, ladies and gentlemen, that with the total collapse of law and order in the society, the law of jungle will prevail, in which the survivors would unconditionally accept the writ and authority of the jihadist organization, without even bothering to differentiate between the good and the evil. Taking advantage of their savagery, the jihadists would at least obtain people's acquiescence, if not popular or willing support, which will help the militants to enforce Sharia law and administer basic services like any government does, like health and water supply and everything. So the jihadists' control over a certain territory would further serve as a secure base to consolidate and attack the adjoining areas, regions or states for their propagation and overthrow other governments. They would loot and plunder the wealth and keep the terrorized population under perpetual fear and anxiety. Number 3, in the third and the last stage, ladies and gentlemen, it was identified by Naji as empowerment stage or Shaukat al-Tamkeen. In this era, the areas under the control of the jihadists would become the nucleus of a new caliphate. With the establishment of an Islamic state, which Naji had proposed to be ruled by one leader, splintered jihadist groups and the areas under their control through their acts of savagery would be unified and brought under the umbrella of one Muslim caliphate. Naji believed that despite their enormous suffering, excuse me, so he was of firm belief that despite their enormous sufferings and brutalities and loss of life at the hands of the forces of jihad, the people the jihadists would gain recognition and legitimacy in the eyes of the people and rule them through Sharia law, employing a mixture of both coercion as well as persuasion. I wonder that by listening to all this, ladies and gentlemen, a movie of Daesh or the Islamic State creation ran before your eyes or not. But that's the Daesh or Islamic State's evolution exactly occurred as prescribed by Abu Bakr al-Naji in early 1990s. And when I would give you the Al-Qaeda's 7-stage strategy, you would be horrified to learn about the ideology, the foresight, about their planning and their preparedness of these terrorist forces, which they had done during the early 1990s. So, following the footsteps of Abu Bakr Naji, later another lieutenant of Osama bin Laden named Abu Musab al-Suri, he drafted a 1600-page treatise or an academic dissertation called Dawatul Mukawama al-Islamiyya al-Alamiya, simply in English, the call for global Islamic Jihad to terrorize the Western world. Abu Musab al-Suri, whose real name was Mustafa Setmarian Nasser, he called for one, a nizam la tanzim, or a system to be put in place and not an organization per se. Number two, he introduced a deterritorialized system of jihad through individualized or cellular terrorism to suit the complexities of the global battlefield. In other words, al-Suri propagated the concept of Lone Ranger type of terror attacks by individuals without any supervision or higher authorities' approval. Negating the Islamic injunction of jihad as a sole prerogative of the state, ladies and gentlemen, in the Islamic country only, and not on the personal call or whim or will of an individual. All these terror publications legitimized and authorized an individual to wage jihad in his personal capacity and at his own discretion, calling Muslims around the world to arms in the holy war against the godless Soviet Union. Abdullah Yusuf Azzam, who I had told you was Al-Qaeda's as well as Osama bin Laden's mentor, had already decreed through a fatwa, and I wish to quote for you, "Jihad will remain an individual obligation until all the lands that were Muslim will be returned to us. So Islam will reign again." Unquote. Al-Qaeda further disfigured and distorted various Islamic injunctions, ladies and gentlemen, into its own warped or perverted interpretations that run contrary to the bona fide Islamic viewpoint. For instance, first of all, jihad as a struggle means a strive for excellence or purity, especially a state-sanctioned prerogative and its sole discretion and jurisdiction to use force or resort to violence under restricted conditions of survival or threat. But it had been twisted and distorted by Al-Qaeda as an obligation on Fard-e Ain, on an individual in his or her personal capacity to use violence. Secondly, Bayat, or a pledge of allegiance, remains an age-old concept when there used to be legitimate caliphs who were universally recognized, representing the whole of the Muslim Ummah, or the Muslim fraternity or a Muslim community or nationhood. So Al-Qaeda, however, made Bayat or the allegiance obligatory to its Amir, leaving no room for refusal or breaking the pledge, which invoke takfir or apostasy, making one liable to be killed as a murtad or a rejecter and becoming an infidel or a non-believer. Third, Al-Qaeda further disfigured and dishonored the exalted virtue of martyrdom or shahadat in Islam. A heroic laying down of life while fighting for the cause of Allah Almighty is considered to be the most honorable, glorious, and the highest form of attainment of death by any Muslim. However, by deviously linking shahadat with acts of terror, taking innocent lives, and brainwashing young kids into carrying out suicide attacks, Al-Qaeda stigmatized and disgraced this concept of martyrdom in Islam. Finally, I have mentioned this earlier that Al-Qaeda introduced the medieval concept of khuruj or revolt against deviant Muslim rulers, decreeing their expulsion from the fold of Islam by becoming an authority, a religious authority themselves, and also carry out takfir, which is killing or apostatization or excommunication of fellow faith followers, as well as non-Muslims alike, as justification for its mindless terror that keeps threatening the human race on this planet Earth. As a fundamental part of Al-Qaeda's philosophy, takfir, ladies and gentlemen, is the invocation of kufr or infidelity, or terming any Muslim individual or a state by a believer or a group of so-called purified Muslims, decreeing their death on account of apostasy or becoming non-believer. The very act which precipitates takfir is termed as mukaffir. Takfir's contemporary formulation and usage emerged from the writings of rebel Islamic theorists and scholars from the 20th century like Hassan al-Banna and Sayyid Qutb, incidentally both belonging to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. They advocated apostatization and excommunication against the state, as well as against the society for their jahaliyah, or blind in unenlightenment, similar to the pre-Islamic era. Sayyid Qutb pronounced the apostasy of those Muslim rulers who collaborated with the Western colonial and imperialist powers, as well as those of his fellow faith followers who did not practice the Islamic teachings and preachings in its true puritanical form. For his sanctioning and propagating violence and rebellion against the state, Sayyid Qutb, ladies and gentlemen, was executed in Egypt on August 29, 1966. The terrorist strategy of morphing, mutating, dispersing, disappearing allows them to fight for another day, as the dictum goes in the guerrilla warfare. While the terrorists need physical territory under their control for an opportunity to influence and motivate people towards their cause, or the cause of the caliphate or the khilafat, these groups quickly dissolve and relinquish ground when come under attack, but only to pop up at another place at another time under a different name most of the time. And with the change of name, they wish to appear a different, give a different complexion to their organization, though not shedding their skin and spots. And with the loss of a leader, ladies and gentlemen, this hydra-headed monster, if they lose a leader under drone strike or another attack by the security forces, they quickly choose another Amir. And if they develop any kind of a disagreement Then they form their own faction and begin to find their patron from the mother parties, either Al-Qaeda or Daesh, and offer their pledges of allegiance or bai'at for the receiving of funding and patronage. However, lacking a Clausewitzian center of gravity, these terrorist organizations generally operate without a centralized command and control control architecture. Clausewitz, ladies and gentlemen, was a Prussian general and a military theorist. He had decreed in his Principles of War that for any force to fight, it needs to have a center of gravity. But these terrorists, which are spread around the world in different offshoots, they lack a center of gravity. So not only do they evolve by fragmenting themselves into smaller offshoots, the terror groups thrive through a network of abettors, facilitators, and sympathizers. Exactly following what Abu Bakr Naji had taught them to do in the Idaratul Wahash, or the governance in wilderness, or the management of savagery. They carry out their operations exactly according to those teachings. So finally, a word about the funds or the funding of terrorists, ladies and gentlemen. Militants don't find any dearth or shortage of funds or shortage of arms supplies for their operations. Remember, I had told you in the beginning that a majority of militant organization groups remain as state-sponsored proxies or non-state actors. So who are we befooling here? You might ask as a very legitimate question. So bypassing international monetary checks, many Muslim charities in the Gulf countries and their political supporters of the Islamic cause, either in the shape of advancing their sectarian objectives or to please their Allah, the oil-rich Gulf countries in the Middle East ensure hawala hundi or cash and courier or personal reference transactions to these terror groups. A European Parliament's June 2013 report found, and I quote for you, Middle Eastern Wahhabi and Salafist groups supporting and supplying arms to rebel groups all over the globe. I would encourage you, ladies and gentlemen, to search this report titled The Involvement of Salafism, Wahhabism in the Support and Supply of Arms to Rebel Groups Around the World by the Directorate Journal for External Policies, European Parliament, dated June 2013. And after reading this report, you would know as well as why I had been harping upon this tune in the overview as well as in the root causes that terror and violence in the Muslim world are political and not faith-based or ideological. They are politically motivated operations, and that needs to be de-linked from the faith of Islam. With this somber note, ladies and gentlemen, I take your leave from part number 10 of this discussion on Islamic radicalism and religious terrorism. In part 11, as I said, I will return to give you about the 7-stage strategy, which remains quite similar to what I have told you today in this presentation. And I will also tell you about the jihadists' online propaganda tools and their preposterous narrative so that young men and women who are listening to this talk must be aware of that how these terrorists lure and incite raw and innocent, unsuspecting minds, and with their ridiculously lofty talk of so-called Islamic heroism and glorification of religion. In truth, these militant jihadists, or whatever you may call them, remain pawns to bigger geopolitical designs, tarnishing the good name and image of a faith of Islam, which stands for its compassion, benevolence, and mercifulness. If you understand this basic fact, ladies and gentlemen, and if I could save one child, one kid, one man or a young lady from joining their ranks, I would honestly feel that the purpose of this talk has been served. And I would feel very content that whatever research I did and whatever I explained to you, I have done a job. Well done. Very well done. Thank you very much for listening. And until we meet next, take good care of yourself. This is Adnan Qaiser signing off. Bye for now.